I stood up laughing at their wedding. Ethan hissed furiously. Quit it. You're just bitter. I smiled coldly. Bitter? You traded me for an angel bride who's been blackmailing you, and hiding a terrible crime. The whole church went dead silent. Her perfect smile shattered on the spot. I opened my mouth to spill every secret. 2 years earlier. The summer air in Bramble Creek smelled of cut grass and sun-baked asphalt. A soft breeze drifted through the open library windows, carrying the faint, sweet tang of clover from the town square out front. The town was small, quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business before you even finished living it. It was the sort of slow, wholesome southern town where Sunday church bells ruled the morning, backyard barbecues filled the weekend air, and nobody locked their front doors after dark. I'd spent my entire life rooted here. My name is Clara Bennett, 28, full-time town librarian and part-time caregiver for my 72-year-old grandmother, Marnie. My days ran on a gentle, unbroken routine. I clocked in at 9 each morning, reshelved worn paperbacks, helped kids check out picture books, and filed away town records no one else bothered to touch. I drank the same weak black coffee from the chipped office mug every shift, ate peach oatmeal for lunch, and left at 5 sharp to tend my grandmother's flower garden. Routine never bored me. Stability was a gift I'd always cherished. My parents died in a car crash when I was 16, leaving only Grandma and our creaky blue clapboard house to anchor me. Ever since, I'd craved loyalty above all else. Grand gestures and fiery passion never impressed me. I valued showing up. Staying steady. Choosing someone every single day, without fanfare. That was why loving Ethan Hale had felt so safe for so long. We'd grown up 2 houses apart. We'd walked to the same elementary school, shared popsicles on hot summer porches, and survived the chaos of small-town high school together. We dated casually through our teen years, split briefly when we went to separate community colleges, and reconnected 2 years prior like we'd never been apart. He'd come home to Bramble Creek, burned out from traveling construction jobs, and told me he was ready to settle down for good. He'd knelt on Grandma's weathered porch steps last spring, beneath a trellis of blooming jasmine, and slipped a thin silver band on my left ring finger. There was no grand proposal, no expensive crowd, no viral moment. Just him, calloused from years of building houses, and a quiet promise to build a life with me. I'd said yes instantly. For 12 perfect months, our life felt unshakable. We fixed up a tiny rented cottage on the edge of town, painted the kitchen soft sage green, hung thrifted family photos on the walls, and planned a small autumn wedding. We talked about adopting a rescue dog, about planting a vegetable garden, about growing old slow and quiet together. Ethan laughed easy back then. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and he never hesitated to hold my hand in public or stop by Grandma's house with her favorite lemon drops. I thought we had forever. My phone buzzed sharp in my linen work pocket, breaking the soft hum of the library afternoon. Ethan's name lit bright on the screen, and my shoulders relaxed on instinct. Once, that name had been my favorite sight in the world. "Hey you," I answered softly, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't disturb the handful of readers scattered in the back study area. His voice crashed through the line, tight and frayed at the edges, no trace of his usual warm drawl. "Can we talk when you get off work? It's important." "It can't wait." My fingers froze mid-stack on a pile of children's chapter books. A cold prickle crawled up my spine. I knew his tones after a decade of loving him. This wasn't a casual check-in. This was the voice of someone carrying a weight too heavy to hold any longer. "Of course. I'll be home in 30 minutes. He ended the call without another word. No sweet sign-off, no gentle promise, no "I'll see you soon." Just dead air. The library suddenly felt too quiet. The ceiling fans constant whir grew louder, the rustle of turning pages more pronounced. I finished reshelving my stack but my hands moved numb, my mind racing through every small oddity I'd brushed off in the past 2 months. Ethan working late every night. Ethan deleting text messages before I could glance at his screen. Ethan tensing up every time Lila Carter's name was mentioned in town conversation. I'd ignored it all, chalking it up to wedding stress, telling myself small-town gossip made everyone paranoid. I locked the library's front glass door right at 5, twisting the brass key until it clicked secure. The metal door handle burned warm against my palm, heated by hours of unfiltered summer sun. I slid into my faded old sedan, the seats cracked and worn from years of use, and headed down Main Street toward Grandma's house. Ethan was already waiting on the porch when I pulled into the gravel driveway. He paced the weathered wooden planks back and forth, his work boots scuffing the pale blue paint Grandma had spent years touching up. He ran a rough hand repeatedly over the back of his neck, his classic nervous tick, the one he only used when he was terrified or hiding unforgivable truth. I knew that gesture better than I knew my own reflection. He never fidgeted like that over trivial things. I climbed out of the car and shut the door soft. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping up the porch steps slowly, giving him space to breathe. He stopped pacing cold. His gaze darted past me, fixed on the overgrown marigold bed beside the steps, refusing to meet my eyes. His jaw was locked tight, his shoulders rigid with tension I could physically see. "Clara, I can't do this anymore." My breath stalled entirely in my throat. The bright summer world blurred at the edges, like I'd stepped behind fogged glass. The chirp of crickets, the rustle of tree leaves, the distant hum of a lawnmower all faded to muted background noise. "Do what anymore?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Us. The engagement. This quiet life you've built for us." He finally lifted his eyes to mine, and his gaze was hollow, empty, stripped of every ounce of love I'd grown used to. "It's not enough for me. Not anymore." I stood perfectly still. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not argue or demand explanations. I simply absorbed the brutal words one slow, heavy layer at a time, letting them settle into my chest. "There's someone else, isn't there?" He flinched, a tiny, involuntary jerk of his shoulders, and I knew I was right before he spoke. "Yes. It's Lila. She sees me. She understands the parts of you never notice." Lila Carter. The name tasted like stale sugar on my tongue. She was Bramble Creek's untouchable golden girl, the town's full-time art teacher, volunteer coordinator, and resident angel. For years prior, she'd moved here from a tiny northern county, quiet and soft-spoken, with a perfect smile and endless patience for every person in town. She taught free watercolor classes for kids after school. She baked cookies for the church bake sales every Sunday. She visited the elderly at the town nursing home every Wednesday. She never spoke an unkind word, never turned down a request for help, never ruffled a single feather in town. No one questioned her. No one dared. To doubt Lila was to be the bitter, jealous villain in everyone's eyes. "You're leaving me for her," I said plainly, no anger, no sadness, just quiet confirmation. "I'm sorry." Ethan's apology was hollow, rehearsed, memorized like a script he'd practiced 100 times in private. There was no remorse in his eyes, no grief for the years we'd shared. Only cold resolve. "You deserve someone steady like you. I need more warmth. More passion. More understanding." I lifted my left hand, staring at the simple silver ring on my finger. The metal was cool against my skin, worn smooth from months of twisting when I was nervous. I slipped it off slow, my fingers steady, and held it out to him on my palm. "If you're sure," I said. He stared at the ring like it burned his skin, like it was a reminder of a life he was desperate to escape. He hesitated 3 long seconds before reaching out to take it. "I'm sure," he whispered. His fingers brushed mine as he took the ring, and then he turned and walked away without another word. The screen door squeaked shut behind him in the empty yard, the sound sharp and final in the quiet summer afternoon. That was the day Bramble Creek's ruthless gossip machine turned fully against me. Small towns do not handle heartbreak evenly. They do not tolerate gray areas. They pick a side fast, glorify one person, and crucify the other without a second of hesitation. Within 48 hours, every household in town knew the story Ethan and Lila had carefully crafted. The quiet, boring librarian Clara Bennett had been too dull, too ordinary, too stagnant to keep her ambitious fiancé. Ethan Hale had outgrown his simple hometown life. He'd found true peace and passion with the gentle, pure-hearted Lila Carter, the only woman who could truly match his spirit. I became the town's sad, bitter punchline. I heard the whispers everywhere I went. At the grocery store checkout line, middle-aged women tilted their heads and murmured behind their hands. At Sunday church service, elderly ladies shot me pitying, judgmental glances over their hymnals. Teenagers at the downtown cafe snickered when I walked past the windows. They called me cold, closed off, unloving. They said I'd never appreciated Ethan enough, that I'd taken his loyalty for granted, that I deserved to be left behind. Lila was crowned the hero. She was brave for following her heart. She was kind for not wanting to hurt my feelings. She was the perfect, innocent soul who'd stumbled into a beautiful, destined love. I kept my head down through it all. I showed up for work every day. I bathed Grandma, fixed her meals, watered my front yard marigolds at dawn without fail. I never defended myself. I never snapped back. I never told a soul a single bad word about Lila or Ethan. I refused to become the bitter woman they wanted me to be. Grandma saw through every fake smile and quiet denial. She always did. She'd spent 70 years reading people, and she knew lies better than anyone in town. One humid July evening, we sat together on the front porch as fireflies flickered in the tall grass. Her wooden rocking chair creaked slow and steady with every movement. She lit her usual lavender candle, its soft, earthy scent wrapping around us like a blanket, and stared out at the dark tree line bordering our property. "People love a pretty story," she said quietly, her voice thick with wisdom. "They don't often love the messy, ugly truth hiding underneath it." I picked at a loose thread on my cotton dress, watching crickets jump in the shadowed grass. What truth is there to find? He fell out of love. He chose her. That's all there is. She turned to face me, her aged eyes sharp and unblinking. Men don't throw away 5 years of loyal love overnight, Clara. Not for no reason. Not without pressure. Not without fear driving them. Her words settled in my chest like a slow-burning ember, glowing quiet and hot, refusing to fade. I'd spent weeks convincing myself I'd simply been outgrown. That Ethan had craved excitement and found it in Lila's bright, bubbly personality. That our quiet, steady love had just not been enough. But what if none of it had been a choice at all? That single question became my quiet, secret obsession. I began watching them, not out of petty jealousy, but out of growing, urgent suspicion. I attended the town's weekly farmers' market every Saturday, something I'd always enjoyed, just to observe them from a distance. I watched Ethan stand beside Lila at every community event, always one step behind her, never beside her as an equal partner. He smiled only when she prompted him to. He spoke only when she allowed him to. If he hesitated before answering a town resident's question, Lila would lay a light, delicate hand on his arm, and he'd snap silent instantly, like a dog trained to obey. She redirected every personal question thrown his way. When someone asked about their wedding plans, she gushed over floral arrangements and cake flavors before Ethan could open his mouth. When someone asked about his construction business, she steered the conversation toward his hard-working dedication before he could stumble over a reply. She wove his entire public narrative for him, perfect and flawless, leaving no room for his own words or thoughts. No one else noticed a single thing off. To the town, they were harmony incarnate, a match made in heaven. Only I saw the cage slowly closing around him. One weekday afternoon, I ran into Ethan alone at the county hardware store on the edge of town. The air inside smelled of pine lumber, fresh paint thinner, and damp sawdust. Shelves lined every wall, stacked high with nails, screws, and gardening supplies. He stood frozen in front of a shelf of roofing nails, his broad shoulders slumped forward like he carried 100-pound weight on his back. He looked exhausted, drained thin, his eyes sunken, his jaw tight with constant stress. He glanced up when my footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. His face flinched on instinct, like he expected anger, resentment, or yelling from me. "Clara," he said quietly, his voice rough with fatigue. "You look tired," I said honestly, no malice, no judgment, just plain observation. He huffed a bitter, hollow laugh, running a hand over his neck again. "Wedding planning will do that to you, I guess." "You seem unhappy," I pressed gently, keeping my tone soft enough not to scare him off. His jaw locked instantly. He turned his gaze away from mine, staring hard at the wooden shelf planks. "I'm happy. I'm lucky. I've got a good future ahead of me." The words were recited, robotic, a line he'd been forced to memorize and repeat for anyone who asked. There was no truth in them. "Are you?" I asked simply. He hesitated 2 full, telling seconds before answering. That pause spoke louder than any lie he could speak. "Yes," he said firmly, too firmly, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. He grabbed his box of nails from the shelf, turned on his heel, and hurried toward the register without another word. He did not glance back, did not acknowledge me again, did not let his guard slip for even a second. I stood alone in the empty aisle, certain beyond any doubt, Ethan Hale was not living his dream life. He was surviving a carefully crafted nightmare. That night, I decided to dig for the truth. As town librarian, I had exclusive access to restricted county archives, old police reports, building inspection records, and archived news clippings that regular residents could never pull up. It was a quiet privilege of my job, one I'd never abused, until that night. I stayed late after closing, locking the library doors tight, dimming the overhead lights to a low hum. The fluorescent fixtures buzzed constant overhead, the only sound in the empty building besides my quiet breathing. I pulled up the restricted database on my work computer and typed Lila Carter's full legal name into the search bar. At first, nothing appeared. Her Bramble Creek record was spotless. No traffic violations, no civil disputes, no police calls, no public incidents of any kind. Perfect. Too perfect. Suspiciously perfect. I widened the search radius to her former county, the small northern town she'd claimed she'd left 4 years prior to pursue her art career. In an instant, a buried, redacted file popped up on the screen. Cold case. Missing person. Dated 3 years before she moved to Bramble Creek. A 24-year-old transient man who'd worked seasonal community restoration projects. He'd volunteered alongside Lila for months, helping rebuild local parks and community shelters. He'd vanished overnight after a late-night volunteer shift with her. No body was ever recovered. No witnesses ever came forward. The case went cold within 60 days. The file listed one single person of interest, Lila Mae Carter. My fingers froze on the keyboard. My pulse thundered loud in my ears, drowning out the fluorescent buzz. The town of Bramble Creek knew absolutely nothing of this past. She'd arrived here with a completely wiped clean reputation, hiding a cold case in her wake. I dug deeper, slower and more careful, covering my digital tracks to avoid anyone tracing my searches. I found old civil filings from her hometown. Former friends had filed restraining order petitions against her, citing obsessive attachment and aggressive isolation tactics. Roommates had submitted written statements claiming Lila systematically cut them off from family and friends, slowly taking over every part of their lives until they had no one left but her. One single witness statement stopped my heart cold. She doesn't love people. She collects them. And when they try to leave her orbit, they disappear. I leaned back in my office chair, my vision spinning slightly. The sweet, gentle angel facade crumbled completely away in my mind. Lila was not pure, not kind, not innocent. She was a manipulative predator who wore kindness as camouflage to hide her darkness. And Ethan was her newest, most prized collection piece. Still, I could not understand the full hold she had over him. Why would a strong, independent man allow himself to be trapped, controlled, and blackmailed for years? What leverage did she possess that was powerful enough to make him throw away our entire life together? I kept digging, determined to find the final piece of the puzzle. 3 days later, I found it. Buried deep in a password-protected county building inspection archive, hidden beneath hundreds of routine safety reports, was a redacted construction failure file dated 3 years prior. A local community shelter, a small wooden building used for food banks and youth programs, had nearly collapsed during a routine renovation. Structural beams had been improperly installed, creating a fatal safety hazard. The incident had been immediately covered up by the county to avoid public panic and liability lawsuits. The lead contractor in charge of the renovation, Ethan Hale. The mistake had been entirely his. One wrong measurement, one rushed installation, and the entire building had nearly crumbled while multiple volunteers were inside working. By pure luck, no one had died or been injured, but the potential for disaster had been catastrophic. Ethan had buried the truth immediately. He'd paid off small fines, signed non-disclosure agreements, and never spoken a word of the incident to anyone, not even me. He'd spent years terrified the secret would ruin his construction career, destroy his reputation, and strip him of everything he'd worked to build. And Lila had found the hidden report. She'd uncovered his darkest, most dangerous secret, locked the files away for years, and used them as permanent blackmail leverage. Obey me, stay with me, love me publicly, or I destroy your entire life. That had been her unspoken ultimatum. He had not left me for love. He had left me to protect me. If he'd stayed engaged to me, Lila would have released the report, ruined his career, and dragged me down into the scandal with him. She would have targeted me, hurt Grandma, destroyed our quiet, safe life. Ethan had chosen to break my heart instead of letting me get caught in Lila's destructive path. The realization crashed over me in a brutal, overwhelming wave. Every month of hurt, every night of crying, every sting of town gossip, every moment I'd felt worthless and abandoned, it had all been a lie built on sacrifice. I felt sick to my stomach. I felt furious at Lila's cruelty. Most of all, I felt fiercely determined to tear down every last one of her lies. That night, rain fell soft and steady over Bramble Creek, tapping gentle rhythms against the rooftop and soaking the front yard grass. The air smelled of damp soil and wet pine, cool and clean after weeks of summer heat. A quiet knock sounded at my back door at midnight. I opened it to find Ethan standing on the porch, soaked through with rain, his hair matted to his forehead, his shirt wrinkled and dripping. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking uncontrollably, his face pale and gaunt with exhaustion. "Clara," he whispered hoarsely, his voice breaking. "You know something. I can see it in your eyes. You've found the truth." I studied him, the broken, trapped man beneath the perfect groom facade the town adored. "I know everything," I said quietly. He stumbled forward, gripping the wooden doorframe to steady his shaking body. Pure, unfiltered terror flashed across his face. "Please don't say anything. Don't expose it. She'll destroy me. She'll release the report, ruin my business, ruin my name. I'll lose everything I've ever worked for." "You think she'll ever stop?" I asked, steady and firm. "She's already stolen your freedom, your choices, your happiness. How long before she demands more? How long before she ruins you completely?" He stared at me, helpless and defeated, a man trapped in a cage with no key. I had no choice. If I stayed with you, she would have hurt you. She hates anyone who loves me more than her. She would have targeted Grandma too. I couldn't let that happen. My chest ached sharp and tender, a mix of grief and empathy and rage. All this time, his betrayal had been protection in disguise. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. "Because she watches everyone close to me," he breathed. "She lurks. She listens. She digs up secrets. She finds weaknesses. I thought if I hurt you first, you'd move on, you'd stay safe, you'd be free of her." I shook my head firmly. "You underestimated me. I don't run from danger. I don't run from the truth. I would have fought for you. For us." His gaze drifted past my shoulder, locking onto the stacked printed files spread across my kitchen counter, every police record, every witness statement, every construction failure detail I'd uncovered. Panic flared bright and desperate in his eyes. "You have proof?" "I have everything," I confirmed. "Every secret. Every lie. Every crime she's hidden." He stepped fully inside the doorway, rainwater dripping from his sleeves onto my wooden floorboards, leaving dark wet splotches in his wake. "The wedding is tomorrow," he whispered in defeat. "She's threatened to release everything publicly if I back out. If I leave her at the altar, she destroys me." I smiled then, slow and cold and unshakably certain. "Let her try. Tomorrow, the whole town learns who their precious angel really is. We end her reign of lies for good." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "Clara, don't. She's dangerous. There's more darkness in her past you haven't uncovered yet. More damage she's capable of." "Then we expose every last bit of it," I said. "No more hiding. No more fear. No more letting her control our lives." He stared at me for a long, silent moment, hope flickering back to life in his exhausted eyes for the first time in 2 years. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, finally willing to fight back. "Stand at the altar tomorrow," I told him, clear and decisive. "Play the perfect, grateful groom. Smile for the crowd. Let her believe she's won. Let the entire town celebrate her fake fairy tale with all their hearts." He frowned, confused. "And then?" I glanced back at the mountain of proof on my counter, every secret stacked neat and deadly, ready to burn her perfect world to ash. "Then I laugh. And then I burn her perfect world to the ground." He did not argue. He did not beg for safety. He did not hesitate. For the first time since he'd been trapped by Lila's lies, he looked relieved. Free, even. He left my house quietly, vanishing into the rainy midnight, his steps lighter than they'd been in years. I stayed awake until the first pale hint of dawn broke over the treeline. I cross-referenced every file, double-checked every date, verified every witness statement, and organized all my evidence into a neat, compact folder. I made sure every secret was accounted for, every lie traced back to its source, every crime documented beyond dispute. I prepared for the reckoning. The next morning dawned clear, bright, and cruelly perfect. The sun shone golden over Bramble Creek, the sky cloudless blue, the air warm and gentle, the ideal day for a small-town fairy tale wedding. Town residents flocked to the white wooden chapel in their finest pastel autumn dresses and crisp button-down shirts. They carried wrapped gift bags, floral bouquets, and handwritten cards filled with well wishes. They came ready to celebrate pure love, destined union, and happy endings. They had no idea they were about to watch a monster's mask get ripped off for the entire town to see. I dressed simply, in a plain cream linen dress with no jewelry, no makeup, nothing to draw attention. I folded my evidence folder small and tucked it deep inside my canvas purse, hidden from sight. Grandma met me at the front door, her weathered hands folding gently around mine. She did not ask for details, did not demand explanations. She simply squeezed tight and spoke soft. "Do what's right, baby. Truth always rises to the light, no matter how long it's hidden." I nodded. "I know." I drove to the chapel alone, parking my sedan at the far edge of the gravel lot, away from the crowd of wedding guests. I walked up the stone steps slow and silent, slipping into the very last pew at the back of the sanctuary, blending perfectly into the crowd. Invisible. Waiting. Watching. The chapel organ music began to play, soft and sweet, the traditional wedding melody echoing off the stained glass windows. The crowd settled into quiet, reverent silence, every guest leaning forward in anticipation. Ethan stood rigid at the altar, his shoulders locked, his hands clenched tight at his sides. His face was pale, his jaw tense, his eyes scanning the crowd in search of me the second the music started. Our gazes locked across the silent chapel. A flicker of quiet resolve passed between us. He was ready. I was ready. Then the tall wooden double doors at the back of the chapel swung open wide. Lila stepped forward in a floor-length white lace wedding gown, her sheer veil floating soft behind her. She glided down the aisle with practiced, effortless grace, her lips curved in her signature gentle, innocent smile. The crowd sighed in collective adoration. Whispers of "so beautiful and perfect couple" rippled through the pews. Every eye in the room worshipped her flawless, manufactured perfection. Every eye but mine. I stood up laughing at their wedding. Ethan hissed furiously. "Quit it. You're just bitter." I smiled coldly. "Bitter? You traded me for an angel bride who's been blackmailing you, and hiding a terrible crime." The whole church went dead silent. Her perfect smile shattered on the spot. I opened my mouth to spill every secret. Lila's gloved fingers flew to clutch the edge of her lace veil, her soft features twisting into a sharp, furious scowl no one in Bramble Creek had ever witnessed. All the gentle warmth she had spent 4 years carefully crafting melted away in an instant, leaving only raw, unfiltered rage stretched tight across her cheeks. She froze halfway down the aisle, the hem of her ivory wedding dress pooling across the polished wooden planks beneath her feet. The organist's fingers hovered suspended over the keys, a single trembling note hanging thick in the still chapel air before fading into silence. Every guest twisted in their pew seats, heads craned toward my position at the back of the sanctuary, quiet murmurs swelling then dying as the weight of my words sank into every corner of the room. "You have no right to disrupt this sacred ceremony," Lila called out, her voice shrill and brittle, stripped of its usual honeyed softness. I took one slow step forward, my canvas purse hanging loosely from one wrist, the thick folder of evidence tucked safely inside its lined interior. My quiet footsteps echoed through the vast empty space between the back pews and the altar, each small tap amplifying the tension wrapping around every person gathered to witness their so-called perfect union. "Right or wrong does not change the truth you have spent years burying," I replied, my tone steady and calm, no trace of bitter hysteria to give her room to paint me as a spurned, jealous woman. Ethan shifted on his feet at the altar, his rigid shoulders sagging with a quiet relief he could no longer hide. For months he had rehearsed obedient smiles and scripted pleasantries to appease Lila's endless demands, and for the first time since he had ended our engagement, he no longer needed to pretend. He met my gaze across the crowd, a faint, weary flicker of gratitude shining in his tired eyes. "Clara, do not listen to this woman's lies," Lila snapped, stepping forward one pace, her bridal heels clicking sharply against the floor. "She cannot accept our happiness. She has spent every single day since we parted plotting to ruin everything good I have built here in this town." An elderly woman in the front pew gasped, pressing a wrinkled palm to her chest as she stared between Lila's tear-pricked fake expression and my composed stance near the rear doors. Several guests began to shuffle uncomfortably, unsure which side of the sudden conflict they ought to stand upon after years of accepting Lila's carefully curated angelic persona as absolute fact. "I have spent every single day uncovering the secrets you buried beneath your gentle smiles and charitable deeds," I corrected her, reaching one hand into my purse to grip the edge of the thick folder holding printed police reports, witness statements, and county construction filings. "You did not move to this small town seeking a fresh start to share your love of art with local children. You fled your old hometown to escape a cold case and dozens of restraining orders filed by people you manipulated, isolated, and sought to control entirely." Color drained completely from Lila's face. Her lips parted, ready to spill another rehearsed defense, yet no words tumbled forth. For a long heartbeat she simply stood frozen, her wide eyes locked on the folder peeking out from my bag, recognizing exactly what documents I held within my grasp. "That is slander," she managed to whisper, her voice trembling so violently the words barely carried past the first row of wooden pews. "You cannot make such cruel accusations without proof." "I would never stand in a house of worship and make empty claims," I said, lifting the folder high enough for dozens of nearby guests to spot the official county letterhead stamped across the front pages of the stacked documents. "Every detail I am about to share is recorded, filed, and verified by official state records from 2 different counties." A murmur of nervous curiosity rippled through the congregation. A man seated near the aisle stood slightly, leaning forward to get a clearer view of the evidence clutched in my hand. Others exchanged uncertain glances, the town's once unanimous admiration for Lila beginning to fray around the edges as doubt crept into their minds. Ethan cleared his throat softly, drawing every eye toward the altar once more. He removed one hand from his clenched side, running his palm over the back of his neck, that familiar nervous habit I had watched him display whenever he concealed a heavy truth. "I cannot pretend any longer," he spoke quietly, his voice rough from months of suppressed anxiety. "Clara is not lying. Every secret Lila holds over my life has kept me trapped in a prison of fear since long before I ended our engagement." Lila whirled toward him, her bridal veil whipping across one shoulder as her temper finally shattered the last remaining thread of her self-control. "You promised you would never betray me," she hissed, her tone sharp enough to cut through the quiet chapel air. "I protected you when your careless construction work nearly killed dozens of innocent volunteers inside that community shelter. I buried your mistake so your business, your reputation, your entire future would remain intact." "You did not protect me," Ethan replied, shaking his head slowly. "You held my error hostage to force me into leaving the only person who ever loved me without demands or hidden ultimatums. You forced me to break Clara's heart to shield her from your vengeful retaliation." Several gasps echoed through the room at his admission. The carefully constructed narrative the couple had fed the entire town for 2 years crumbled instantly. No longer was Ethan a man who had outgrown his quiet hometown fiance to chase passionate new love. He was a terrified man blackmailed into abandoning the woman he cared for deeply to spare her from ruin. I flipped open the front cover of my evidence folder, pulling out the redacted building inspection report dated 3 years prior. I held the sheet of paper aloft, allowing the typed official text to catch the warm golden sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows lining the chapel walls. "Every detail of that nearly fatal construction failure is documented right here," I announced, turning slightly so guests on both sides of the central aisle could glimpse the county seal stamped at the bottom corner of the page. Ethan made a costly, dangerous mistake on a volunteer shelter renovation project. Lila discovered the hidden report and threatened to release it to every local news outlet and business association within a single week if he refused to cut all ties with me and commit himself fully to her. One woman sitting midway down the left pew stood to her feet, her brows drawn tight with disbelief. "Is this truly the reason you left Clara?" she called toward the altar, directing her question straight at Ethan. Ethan nodded once, his jaw tight with shame. "I believed sending her away from my side was the only way to keep her safe," he admitted. "I knew Lila would not hesitate to drag Clara and her elderly grandmother into the scandal if I resisted her demands. I chose to bear the town's judgment for abandoning my engagement rather than watch the only family Clara had left suffer retaliation for my past error." Lila let out a shrill, bitter laugh, her gloved hands balling into tight fists at her sides. "You all choose to believe these fabricated tales," she shouted, scanning the crowd with wild, desperate eyes. "This woman spent months alone in the library digging through confidential public records to twist harmless personal history into malicious falsehoods against me. I never manipulated anyone. I never threatened Ethan with exposure. I fell in love with a lonely, regretful man who needed someone to understand his burdens." I reached back into the folder, pulling out a stack of printed witness statements from Lila's former hometown. I found the pages opened slightly to display multiple hand-signed declarations from past roommates, former volunteer coworkers, and childhood friends. "These documents tell a far different story," I said, letting the top statement hang forward so the opening line was legible to nearby onlookers. "For separate restraining order applications detail your pattern of emotional manipulation, forced social isolation, and obsessive possession of every person you form close bonds with. One former volunteer even filed a formal police statement connecting you to the sudden, unexplained disappearance of a young man who worked alongside you on park restoration projects 3 years ago." The chapel descended into stunned silence once again. No guest dared to whisper or shift in their seat. Every pair of eyes locked onto Lila's rapidly paling face, watching as her carefully maintained composure dissolved completely. "That missing man was just a drifter who chose to leave town without telling anyone," Lila argued, her voice wavering with mounting panic. "I had absolutely nothing to do with his departure. The police cleared me of any suspicion within weeks of filing the missing person report. The police never cleared you, I corrected gently, turning to the next page in my folder to display the cold case file summary. Your status as a person of interest was never officially removed from the open investigation. Local authorities lacked sufficient physical evidence to press criminal charges, yet multiple witness statements confirmed you were the last individual seen speaking with the transient before he vanished without a trace. An older man seated near the chapel entrance pulled out his mobile phone, quietly snapping a photograph of the official county documents I held displayed open in my hands. Several other guests followed suit, capturing images of the stamped paperwork to share with other town residents who had not attended the wedding ceremony. Word of Lila's buried past would spread across Bramble Creek faster than any small-town gossip had traveled in decades. Lila stumbled backward one unsteady step, the heels of her wedding shoes catching on the edge of the wooden aisle runner. She nearly lost her balance, one hand flying out to grip the back of a wooden pew to steady her swaying frame. Her perfect bridal makeup smudged as hot, panicked tears spilled down her cheeks, no longer the soft, sympathetic crying the town had grown accustomed to comforting. I built a good life here, she whispered brokenly, staring out at the crowd that had once embraced her as their most beloved community member. I volunteered. I donated. I cared for every lonely soul in this town. Why must you tear everything I have worked to build away from me? Your good deeds were never genuine acts of kindness, Ethan answered softly, stepping down from the altar to stand several feet away from her trembling figure. You volunteered to gather personal information on every vulnerable resident you met. You donated supplies to earn the town's unconditional trust so no one would ever question your hidden motives or your unexplained relocation from another county. You collected lonely, broken people to fill the empty spaces inside yourself, and you destroyed anyone who attempted to break free from the control you exerted over their lives. A local church deacon rose slowly from his front row pew, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he fixed a solemn gaze on Lila. The sheriff's office needs to review all these official documents immediately, he said firmly. We cannot ignore an open missing person cold case tied to a resident within our town limits, nor can we overlook credible allegations of blackmail and emotional coercion. Lila shook her head repeatedly, stepping backward toward the chapel's rear double doors as she attempted to escape the weight of hundreds of accusing stares. Her bridal veil slipped fully from her styled blonde hair, falling loose around her shoulders as she stumbled toward the exit. I did not commit any crime worthy of public humiliation, she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. You cannot ruin my entire life over misinterpreted paperwork and bitter speculation from a scorned former fiancé. These are not speculations, I replied, gathering the scattered pages of my evidence back into the secure folder before stepping forward to hand a full duplicate set of printed records to the waiting church deacon. Every statement, police filing, and construction report has been independently verified through county government databases. The local sheriff can cross-check every detail with state archives to confirm the authenticity of every claim I have made today. Several guests rose from their pews, slowly stepping away from the aisle to create a wide empty space between themselves and Lila. The warm welcome she had received in Bramble Creek for 4 years vanished in a matter of minutes, replaced by cautious wariness and quiet disappointment. No one rushed forward to comfort her as she crumpled against the wooden doorframe, sobbing loudly into her gloved hands. Ethan turned toward me, his shoulders finally relaxing from the constant tension he had carried for years. He kept his usual nervous habit of brushing one hand across the back of his neck, a faint, relieved smile tugging at the corners of his mouth for the first time in far too long. I never thought I would ever feel free again, he admitted, his voice low enough only for my ears to catch above Lila's quiet weeping and the soft murmurs of confused wedding guests. You never deserved to live trapped inside someone else's fear and greed, I said, offering him a gentle, understanding nod. You made painful choices to protect the people you loved. Those choices do not make you a villain. The church deacon finished scanning the first few pages of the evidence folder I had handed over, pulling out his personal mobile phone to dial the local sheriff's department directly from the chapel sanctuary. He spoke in quiet, measured tones, relaying details of the allegations, the cold case connection, and the witness statements collected from Lila's former county of residence. Within 20 minutes, 2 county sheriff vehicles pulled into the gravel parking lot outside the chapel, their red emergency lights flashing softly beneath the bright midday sun. 2 uniformed deputies stepped through the wooden double doors, moving slowly toward the back of the sanctuary where Lila remained collapsed against the exit frame. They spoke to her in calm, professional tones, requesting she accompany them to the sheriff's station to provide a formal recorded statement regarding the open missing person investigation and the blackmail allegations brought forward by Ethan and myself. Lila did not resist their gentle request to leave the chapel premises. She rose slowly to her feet, her once pristine white wedding dress stained with dirt from the wooden floor and smudged with tear streaks along the lace neckline. She glanced back one final time toward the altar, toward Ethan, toward the crowd that had once adored her endlessly, before lowering her head and walking silently between the 2 deputies toward the waiting patrol cars outside. As the chapel doors clicked shut behind their departing figures, the wedding guests slowly began to filter out of the wooden pews, many pausing to offer quiet words of apology to both Ethan and myself for the cruel gossip and unfair judgment we had endured over the past 2 years. Several elderly church members approached to shake my hand, expressing regret for believing the one-sided narrative Lila had carefully crafted to turn the entire town against me. I accepted each quiet apology with gentle grace, never holding on to resentment toward neighbors who had simply loved a pretty, heartwarming story over the messy, complicated truth hidden beneath its surface. Grandma always said most ordinary people choose comfort over conflict whenever given the chance, and I held no bitterness toward those who had fallen for Lila's carefully woven deception. Ethan lingered beside me near the front of the sanctuary once the final wedding guest had exited through the main doors. The empty chapel echoed with the faint hum of the overhead fluorescent lights and the distant chirp of wild birds outside the stained glass windows. He folded his hands loosely in front of his torso, his expression hesitant and uncertain as he searched for the right words to voice his gratitude. "I know I cannot undo all the pain I caused you," he began slowly, his voice thick with remorse. "Every lonely night you spent questioning your own worth, every whispered judgment you endured while walking through town, every moment you believed our years of love had been discarded for a fleeting infatuation, all of that suffering falls squarely on my shoulders." I shook my head gently, crossing my arms loosely over my chest as I leaned one hip against the edge of the wooden altar railing. "You acted out of fear and a desire to protect the people you cared about," I reminded him. "Fear rarely allows people to make perfect, honest choices. I understand the impossible position Lila forced you into the moment she uncovered your long-buried construction mistake." He let out a deep, weary sigh, running one palm over his neck once more, that familiar nervous gesture grounding him amid the overwhelming relief of finally escaping years of coercive control. "What comes next for us?" he asked quietly, his gaze hopeful yet cautious. "I do not expect you to instantly forgive every hurt I inflicted upon you. I only wonder if there might be space for us to slowly rebuild the trust once shattered so completely." I stared out through the tall chapel windows toward the green tree line stretching along the edge of Bramble Creek, watching a pair of wild cardinals flit between the pine branches beneath the brilliant summer sky. I thought of Grandma's quiet wisdom shared on our front porch countless evenings prior, of how truth rarely arrives wrapped in convenient happy endings, of how healing always unfolds slowly, one small careful step at a time. "I do not know if we can return to the quiet engagement life we once planned together," I answered honestly, turning back to meet his earnest gaze. "Too many secrets, too much pain, too many broken layers lie between the people we once were and who we have both become over these past 2 difficult years." Disappointment flickered briefly across his face, yet he nodded in quiet acceptance of my honest admission, never pushing me for an immediate answer or a rushed commitment to reconcile our fractured relationship. "Whatever pace you need to heal, I will respect it fully," he promised. "I plan to settle all legal liabilities tied to the old shelter construction failure, make formal amends to every volunteer whose safety I once endangered, and spend the coming months rebuilding my business with complete transparency and accountability to the entire town." A faint, soft smile tugged at my lips as I listened to his sincere plans to take responsibility for his past mistakes rather than continue hiding from them behind layers of fear and secrecy. "Redemption always begins with honest accountability," I said. "Take all the time you need to mend the parts of your life Lila forced you to hide away. I will not rush either of us toward a future neither of us is ready to embrace. We walked side by side out of the empty chapel together, stepping into the warm golden afternoon sunlight flooding across the gravel parking lot. The faint scent of cut grass and blooming clover drifted across the town square on the gentle summer breeze, the same familiar fragrance I had breathed in the day Ethan first called to end our engagement 2 years prior. Nothing would ever fully erase the loneliness and betrayal we had both endured at the hands of a woman who collected broken people to feed her own endless hunger for control. Some cracks in trust would never fully seal shut, some quiet scars would linger beneath the surface long after the public gossip faded away into small-town memory. Yet as I glanced sideways at Ethan's relaxed shoulders and the quiet hope shining in his eyes, I understood Grandma's words more clearly than ever before. Perfect fairy tale endings rarely exist within ordinary small-town lives. True healing comes from facing hidden truths, choosing kindness over lingering bitterness, and allowing yourself the grace to start again, slowly and carefully, whenever the moment finally feels right. I slipped my hand loosely into his waiting palm as we walked toward my parked sedan, the warm pressure of his calloused fingers wrapping gently around mine. We did not rush to define our uncertain future, nor did we linger endlessly on the painful chapters we had survived together. For now, we simply chose to step forward side by side, leaving every buried secret and manufactured lie firmly behind us in the empty chapel where Lila's perfect angelic mask had finally shattered into countless irreparable pieces. The week following the chaotic wedding unfolded far slower and messier than any of us had anticipated. The moment Lila was escorted into the county sheriff's station, she refused to utter a single word without her legal counsel present. She sat rigidly inside the cold interrogation room, her torn wedding dress exchanged for a plain gray spare top and sweatpants provided by the detention center, her once perfectly styled blonde hair tangled and matted around her shoulders. No amount of gentle questioning from the 2 seasoned detectives could coax a confession out of her lips. She repeatedly invoked her right to remain silent, her eyes cold and hollow, no trace of the soft, sympathetic smile she had worn in Bramble Creek for 4 long years. Every time an officer laid a copy of the restraining order filings or the missing person cold case report on the metal table before her, she would stare blankly at the paperwork, her fingers folded tight in her lap, refusing to acknowledge a single line of evidence. The sheriff reached out to me 3 days after the wedding, calling to ask if I would be willing to travel to the northern county where Lila had once resided to give a formal witness statement alongside Ethan. He explained that local authorities there had struggled for years to find a credible lead in the young transient's disappearance, and our compiled evidence might finally push the cold case toward a breakthrough. I hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Grandma insisted she would be fine staying home alone for 2 days, assuring me that tending her flower beds and baking homemade jam would keep her occupied while Ethan and I drove the 3-hour journey north. Before I left the house early the next morning, she pressed a jar of her homemade peach jam into my tote bag, her wrinkled fingers patting the back of my hand firmly. "Closure is not just for punishing those who hurt you," Grandma murmured on the front porch as Ethan pulled his pickup truck into the gravel driveway. "It is for freeing yourself from the weight of other people's lies. Once you speak your truth aloud to the law, you can finally stop carrying all that anger and suspicion in your heart." I tucked the glass jar safely inside my bag and nodded, climbing into the passenger seat beside Ethan. The atmosphere between us was easy and quiet, no awkward tension lingering from the painful years we had spent apart. We did not rush to fill every silence with forced conversation, instead letting soft country music drift from the truck speakers as we cruised along winding 2-lane highways lined with tall cornfields and clusters of oak trees. Ethan told me small, fragmented details about the endless nights he had spent trapped beneath Lila's control, moments he had never dared to share with anyone before our wedding day reckoning. He spoke of how Lila would show up unannounced at his construction workshop late at night, slipping copies of the hidden building failure report across his workbench as a silent reminder of the ruin she could unleash at any moment. He described how she had forbidden him from texting or calling me after our breakup, threatening to send edited screenshots of fabricated inappropriate messages to every local business owner to destroy both my reputation and his if he dared to reach out. There had been countless lonely evenings where he had pulled his phone out to dial my number, only to lock the screen again in terror, terrified that any small gesture of contact would trigger Lila's vengeful rage. I used to drive past your house every Sunday evening, Ethan admitted quietly, his gaze fixed on the open road stretching ahead of us. I would park at the end of your street and sit in my truck for 20 minutes, just hoping to catch a glimpse of you hanging laundry in the backyard or watering your marigolds. I needed to make sure you were safe, that Lila had kept her promise to leave you completely out of our twisted arrangement. My throat tightened with a mix of sorrow and understanding. For all the months I had believed he had discarded our love without a second thought, he had been quietly watching over me from a distance, bound by fear and helplessness. We checked into a small roadside motel near the county courthouse that evening, 2 separate rooms on the same floor. Over a simple dinner of grilled burgers and iced tea at a nearby diner, we sorted through duplicate copies of all our evidence, highlighting key witness quotes and official document dates to present to the district attorney the following morning. The next day inside the cramped county courthouse, we sat side by side in a sterile witness room, answering every detailed question thrown our way by prosecutors and cold case detectives. Multiple former acquaintances of Lila's were brought in via video call to provide corroborating testimony, each of them recounting eerily similar tales of emotional manipulation, forced isolation, and obsessive possessiveness. One former roommate, a woman in her early 30s, broke down in tears as she described how Lila had spent months slowly cutting her off from every friend and family member, convincing her that no one truly cared about her well-being except Lila herself. She recounted how she had attempted to move away to escape the toxic dynamic, only to receive dozens of anonymous threatening phone calls in the middle of the night shortly after relocating. By the time we finished our witness statements in the late afternoon, the district attorney confirmed they had enough credible evidence to charge Lila with multiple counts of coercion, blackmail, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. While physical evidence still remained insufficient to press murder charges in the missing person cold case, she would remain in custody pending trial, denied bail due to her high risk of fleeing the state to evade prosecution. As we walked back to Ethan's pickup truck outside the courthouse, a light drizzle began to fall from the overcast gray sky. We stood beneath the motel's small covered awning for a moment, watching raindrops slide down the windshield, no words needed between us. The long, exhausting weight of uncovering every buried secret had finally lifted from both of our shoulders. When we drove back to Bramble Creek 2 days later, the town had undergone an irreversible shift in public opinion. The photographs of official county documents shared across local social media groups had spread rapidly, and nearly every resident now understood how thoroughly Lila had manipulated their kindness and trust to build her false angelic persona. Gone were the sideways judgmental glances and whispered gossip I had endured for 2 long years. Instead, strangers waved warmly as I walked down Main Street, and shop owners pressed free loaves of fresh bread and homemade pastries into my hands whenever I stopped to run errands. Many of the elderly church ladies who had once whispered cruel judgments behind my back sought me out at the library to offer sincere, heartfelt apologies for believing one side of a carefully crafted lie. Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had once shot me pitying, critical stares during Sunday church services, arrived at the library one Tuesday afternoon with a large tin of chocolate chip cookies. She set the tin gently on my front desk, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I can still recall the harsh words I muttered to my husband about you after Ethan announced his engagement to Lila," she said quietly, twisting the hem of her floral apron nervously. "We all wanted to believe in a sweet fairy tale love story, and we foolishly turned our backs on the quiet, loyal girl who had lived in our town her whole life. Forgive our blindness, Clara." I thanked her kindly and accepted the cookies, telling her I held no resentment toward anyone who had been misled by Lila's masterful deception. Deep down, I understood how easy it was to fall for a carefully curated public image, especially within the close-knit bubble of a small rural town. Ethan began the long process of making amends for his past construction mistake. He hosted 2 public town hall meetings at the community center, openly explaining every detail of the faulty shelter renovation 3 years prior, taking full responsibility for his rushed, careless work that had put dozens of volunteers in mortal danger. He set up a public repair fund, donating a large portion of his construction business profits to renovate the aging community shelter from the ground up, hiring local tradespeople and volunteer workers to ensure every structural safety regulation was strictly followed this time around. Weekends were spent coordinating volunteer shifts at the shelter construction site, and I often spent my Saturdays there alongside Ethan, bringing jars of Grandma's homemade lemonade and batches of sugar cookies to hand out to exhausted workers. The slow rhythm of physical labor and collective community healing knitted the fractured town back together, erasing the last lingering traces of the division Lila had unwittingly sown during her 4 years in Bramble Creek. Many volunteers approached Ethan to voice their admiration for his courage in admitting his past mistake publicly. In an era where most business owners would go to extreme lengths to cover up professional failure, his radical honesty earned him far more respect than any carefully polished public reputation ever could. His construction company slowly regained every client he had feared losing, with local families lining up to hire his team for home renovations and commercial building projects. One Saturday evening after the final volunteer shift wrapped up at dusk, Ethan and I walked hand in hand along the tree-lined trail that wound beside Bramble Creek's small river. Fireflies flickered gently above the tall wild grass, mirroring the same peaceful summer evenings I had spent sitting on Grandma's porch 2 years prior, lost in confusion and heartbreak. I never thought I would get the chance to rebuild my reputation, let alone walk beside you like this again, Ethan said softly, pausing beside a weathered wooden footbridge spanning the shallow creek. I spent so many nights trapped in Lila's cage, convinced I would spend the rest of my life paying for one terrible youthful mistake in constant fear and loneliness. I leaned lightly against his shoulder, gazing out at the calm water glinting beneath the fading golden sunset. Mistakes do not have to define your entire future, I replied gently. You have spent months making amends, choosing transparency over secrecy, courage over fear. That is the man you truly are, not the terrified puppet Lila forced you to pretend to be. Ethan reached into the pocket of his denim work jacket and pulled out a small velvet jewelry box, his fingers trembling slightly with nervousness. He lowered himself to one knee on the soft grass beside the creek, his earnest eyes locked firmly on mine. I do not expect a rushed answer, and I am prepared to wait however long you need to heal all the wounds I once caused you, he said, opening the velvet box to reveal a delicate new silver engagement ring, etched with tiny wild clover engravings around its band. I want to spend the rest of my days choosing you freely, no threats, no secrets, no forced ultimatums. If you are willing to give me a second chance to love you the way you always deserved to be loved. Tears blurred my vision as I stared down at the simple, meaningful ring, far more precious to me than any extravagant diamond could ever be. All the loneliness, suspicion, pain, and betrayal of the past 2 years melted away in that quiet sunset moment beside the creek that had given our small town its name. Before I gave Ethan my answer, I returned home to Grandma's blue clapboard house that night, sitting with her on our familiar front porch beneath the twinkling string lights we had hung the previous summer. I told her about Ethan's proposal, the nervous hope shining in his eyes, and the quiet uncertainty still lingering deep within my heart. Grandma rocked slowly in her wooden chair, her lavender candle flickering softly between us as she shared a story she had never spoken aloud before. When she was young, her own fiancé had been forced to leave her behind decades earlier, blackmailed by a corrupt local businessman to break off their engagement to protect her family's livelihood. For years she had believed he had abandoned her out of a lack of love, only uncovering the bitter truth long after he had passed away from a work-related accident. I spent decades bitter and closed off, convinced love could never be trusted, Grandma whispered, her gaze distant as she recalled her own youthful heartbreak. It was only when I finally let go of my resentment that I understood sometimes the people we love hurt us not out of cruelty, but out of desperate fear to keep us safe. Her words settled gently inside my chest, finally quieting the last flickers of doubt that had lingered within me. Ethan had not chosen to break my heart to discard our love. He had chosen heartbreak as a shield to keep me far away from Lila's destructive rage. His painful decision had been rooted in protection, not betrayal. The following Sunday morning, I met Ethan beside the same jasmine trellis on Grandma's porch where he had first proposed to me years earlier. The sweet white blossoms bloomed thick around the wooden frame, their soft fragrance wrapping around us like a gentle embrace. I held out my left hand toward him, a warm, genuine smile spreading across my face. I do not want to rush our future, I told him as he slipped the clover-etched silver ring onto my finger. We will take every slow, careful step together to rebuild our trust, our relationship, and the quiet life we once dreamed of sharing side by side. Ethan pressed a soft, tender kiss to my knuckles, his eyes glistening with relieved, grateful tears. We did not plan a grand, lavish wedding this time around. We agreed to hold a small intimate ceremony the following spring, with only Grandma, close friends, and the volunteer community members who had stood beside us through our town's painful reckoning in attendance. As the warm summer breeze swept across Bramble Creek, carrying the sweet scent of clover and blooming jasmine through every street and backyard, I finally understood the true power hidden within the truth Grandma had shared with me that humid July evening 2 years prior. Pretty, polished fairy tale stories always captured people's hearts first, but the messy, painful, honest truth was what set every trapped soul free. Lila's carefully crafted angelic mask had shattered forever inside that sunlit chapel on her would-be wedding day, but in the wreckage of her lies, Ethan and I had found our way back to each other, free at last to love openly, bravely, and without fear. We would carry the scars of our past pain with us always, gentle reminders to cherish every honest choice and every loyal, loving person who chose to stand beside us through darkness and light. And as we walked forward hand in hand into our slow, carefully rebuilt future, I knew beyond any doubt that this time, our happy ending would never be a fabricated lie, it would be ours, earned through courage, forgiveness, and the unbreakable loyalty we had always promised one another.